Thank you for joining the Fall 2020 APS Seminar Series. Just a quick note before we get started. All questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Questions can be typed into the Q&A box throughout the presentation. Or when the seminar has concluded, you can raise your hand and we'll open your mic to ask a question live. So today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Evelyn Reilly. Evelyn is a second-year master's student in the Applied Plant Science program, focusing on agronomy and agroecology. She has been interested in conservation and sustainable agriculture for a long time, which led her to an undergraduate degree in food systems from the University of Minnesota. After graduating in 2015, she spent time traveling and living in Morocco, as well as working as freelance writer, cheesemonger, and field technician before beginning the APS program in January 2019. With that, I give you Evelyn.
Thank you, Reneth, and thank you, Dawn. And thanks everybody for being here. I'm so excited to have the chance to tell you a little bit about my research. We've been doing some really cool things in the Sustainable Cropping Systems Lab, so I'll get right to it. So our overarching research question is, how can we design cropping systems that are both environmentally and economically sustainable so we can farm while protecting drinking water, among other natural resources? So one potential solution is growing intermediate wheatgrass for Kernza, a new perennial grain crop, which may help reduce nitrate leaching into groundwater and provide farmers with new sources of revenue. So here's an outline of what's going to be in this presentation. First, I'll talk a little bit about the development of Kernza as a crop. I'll go over some of the impacts of production agriculture that drive the need for crops like this. We'll talk specifically about nitrate leaching, the focus of my research. Then we'll get into why Kernza specifically. And then I'll tell you the details of our projects, both focusing on nitrate leaching and yield. One is a plot scale trial in central Minnesota, and the others are field scale projects in southwest and southeast Minnesota. And then I'll sum it up by telling you a little bit about the impacts of this work. So some background on intermediate wheatgrass. It is a forage grass that was originally introduced to the United States around the turn of the 20th century. And it's currently being developed into a dual use crop so that we can get a perennial grain harvest from it, as well as a spring and or a fall forage cutting. So a quick note about the terms Kernza versus intermediate wheatgrass. You'll often hear people use them interchangeably, and I do it too sometimes, but they're not technically the same. So Kernza is a name for the grain specifically that's intended for human consumption, and it's trademarked by the Land Institute. This helps differentiate forage grain seed from the improved varieties. It helps with quality assurance and supply chain control. So intermediate wheatgrass is the plant, but Kernza is the grain from these improved food varieties. And this picture shows, just to get a sense of the difference, some seeds from forage intermediate wheatgrass compared to some current varieties developed for grain. So early Kernza development, it began at the Rodale Institute in New York, and the goal was a perennial grain that can be still used for forage. Intermediate wheatgrass was selected in 1983 out of nearly 100 different perennial grasses, primarily on the basis that it has relatively large seeds, but other characteristics as well. This picture shows Rush, which is a forage variety of intermediate wheatgrass. So just so you have a sense of kind of what they were starting with. And the first two breeding cycles took place there at the Rodale Institute with Rodale and USDA researchers. Then the germplasm was transferred to the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. The breeding program there began in 2003, led by Dr. Lee DeHaan, who actually got his PhD at the University of Minnesota with Don Wise, Craig Schaefer, and Nancy Elke. So there's a lot of sort of connections throughout the story of this Kernza development. And the Land Institute is really focused on perennial development that mimics a natural prairie ecosystem. So this kind of natural systems agriculture. They want to combine the sustainability of a prairie with yields comparable to annuals. And that was begun by Wes Jackson and his vision for this. And this picture shows Kernza in some research fields at the Land Institute. 2 more selection cycles took place there, resulting in a grain yield increase of 77%. And then in 2011, germplasm was shared with the University of Minnesota. So now work is continuing at both of those institutions, as well as with researchers throughout the country and around the world. So this has become an exciting global effort. Some of the main goals of the Kernza program include free threshing, developing intercropping systems such as with alfalfa, developing baking qualities and flavor, lodging resistance, shatter resistance, optimizing management, larger seed size, and providing adequate support to growers. Work at the University of Minnesota is addressing all of these dimensions. So we have breeders working on genomic selection models and phenotyping. We have food scientists working on flavor attributes, malting qualities, dough conditioning. We have agronomists working on all sorts of fertilizer timing, variety trials, intercropping. And we have a lot of supply chain specialists figuring out how we can get this crop from the field to the end users, get it processed, and all those steps throughout. A really important entity here at the U working on this is the Forever Green initiative. So that is also, I mentioned Don Wise and Craig Schaefer before, that is really their creation. And that also, like the Land Institute, is interested in developing continuous living cover systems, but their approach is a bit broader. It includes winter annuals as well, cover crops, things like that. And they look at all aspects of new sustainable crops with a focus on breeding to deliver high quality plant material. And so many people have become involved in the Forever Green initiative and the many perennial crops and winter annuals being developed. So current progress on Kernza is really exciting. We have the first named variety, Minnesota Clearwater, introduced by the University of Minnesota in 2019. And Kernza is now grown on 2,000 acres by over 100 farmers, many of them in Minnesota. And we're continuing to get lots of interest from growers and end users, people making everything from bread to beer to granola. And even companies like General Mills have wanted to include this in their products. And the picture on the right here shows a cereal they made that included Kernza. So it's exciting to have support from big companies like that. And then on the left is some harvested Minnesota Clearwater Kernza, so you get a sense of what that looks like. Something people often wonder about is the profitability. And this is not the focus of my work, but just a quick note on this. The dual use is still key. So the fact that you can get a forage harvest off it as well is important. And it's also important to understand that the farmers growing Kernza are part of the experimental team. So it's often grown in, in some cases, relatively small plantings as part of their larger portfolio of crops. But we really value their input and their support to them as well for being part of this process. There's also the plantings in Minnesota we try to get those clustered together to concentrate resources and grower support. So that's another way to increase the profitability. And also the current yields are not the maximum potential yields. They're still being progress. One way that that's going to happen is through the Kernza CAP grant, which is really exciting. This is here at the U. There is a $10 million USDA project to develop Kernza. And the fact that the U just got this is the result of over 30 years of collaboration. And it indicates that researchers throughout the country have been really convinced of the potential of Kernza to have an impact on things like nitrate leaching and other environmental issues. So This brings up the question, if it's taken all this time, all this effort by dozens of people around the world, if it takes all this money, why bother investing in crops like Kernza? Well, it's because we desperately need alternatives like this. It's driven by the problems with conventional industrial agriculture. And obviously there are some benefits. It's highly productive, but this comes primarily through the reliance on pesticides, fertilizers, and irrigation, which has led to soil and water quality degradation on a large scale. One of the major issues is soil erosion. So soil only forms at 0.004 millimeters per year, give or take. Compare that to what's lost from no-till agriculture, 0.065, or what's lost from tilled. These are many, many more times the rate of loss than what can be formed. In the case of tilled agriculture, it's lost at about 360 times the rate it's formed. This means that about 24 billion tons of soil is lost annually. So this is just one example. And here you can see some bad erosion in soybean field. It also has water quality impact. So surface water is the main source of pollution in rivers and streams in the United States. Leads to eutrophication, leading to algal blooms and hypoxia. I'm sure you're all familiar with the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. That's primarily due to agriculture. So here in this picture, you can see an algal bloom from excess phosphorus. But things like nitrate contamination of groundwater are harder to see. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So nitrate is a particular form of nitrogen, an atom of nitrogen bonded to 3 oxygen atoms, and it's negatively charged. Nitrogen is an essential plant nutrient. We provide it to crops in order to boost productivity. It can be provided in the form of nitrate, ammonia, urea, manure, among other things. But other forms of nitrogen can be converted to nitrate by soil microbes. So whatever form it's going on the field in, it can be converted to nitrate and you still have a risk of nitrate leaching. Because it's negatively charged, it does not stick well to soil particles, which are also tend to be negatively charged. This is in contrast to ammonium, for example, which is positively charged and sticks better to clay particles. We don't see anywhere near the kinds of problems with ammonium leaching as we do with nitrate. So if the soil is sandy, this is even more of a problem because there's less surface area. So any nitrate that's not taken up by plant roots or fixed to soil will either run off or leach. And if you have shallow roots, you have even less uptake. And then the total leaching is a function of the water volume that drains, and then the nitrate concentration in that water. So those, keep that in mind because those are kind of the 2 key things we're looking at in these projects to be able to estimate total leaching loads, which is the important thing for groundwater protection. Unfortunately, here in Minnesota, we have all the risk factors for nitrate leaching, especially in that southern and central part of the state. We have a lot of cropland, we have high nitrogen inputs to that cropland, and we have a lot of well-drained soil due to the glacial outwash sand plains and karst geology, both of which are very sensitive to surface activity. And we also have some, not all, but some very shallow aquifers. So this is problematic for us. Just to give you a sense of the relative amounts of nitrate being lost from different systems, I'm showing you here some data from studies on tile drain water. Now, that's not the same as just soil solution moving downward into an aquifer, but it still gives a useful sense of the difference in systems in soil solution below the rooting zone. So here the top 3 are continuous corn, soybean, and they have nitrate concentrations in the water over 20 parts per million, almost 30. Compare that to alfalfa and conservation reserve program land where it's less than 2. So this is a difference of an order of magnitude when we're comparing annual row crops and perennials or conservation reserve program land. So very big difference here. And this data comes from multiple studies by U of M scientists, including Randall, Mulla, and Vetch. So this is useful data. So let's talk more about the details of light nitrate leaching in Minnesota. It's widespread, it's costly, and it's dangerous. The red dots on the map show private wells throughout the state that have tested above the EPA drinking water limit for nitrate, which is 10 parts per million. In this case, that's equivalent to milligrams per liter. I'll be using both of those units in this talk. So 13% of private wells in the state test above that. In the Central Sand Plains region, that goes up to 30%. So you can see that those red dots are really clustered kind of in the center there. It's difficult and expensive to remove nitrate from drinking water once it gets into it. It's highly soluble. So you need to use reverse osmosis or other state-of-the-art filtration systems to get it out. A regular water treatment doesn't cut it. So if you're talking about a small town of a couple thousand people needing to build a multi-million-dollar water treatment plant, that can end up being very expensive on a per household basis. Here's another set of data. This is from Minnesota Department of Agriculture deep testing wells in pesticide monitoring region 4, which is that Central Sand Plains area. And this shows median nitrate concentrations over time, over the past decade. You'll notice that the purple line is that EPA drinking water limit, 10 parts per million. The median is the black line, and the red line is the 90th percentile. So even the median is above 10 parts per million for the past decade. So this is a widespread and serious problem. Why do we care about this? Well, it can have serious health effects, possibly even at concentrations below the EPA limit. So consumption of nitrate in drinking water is associated with higher risk of certain cancers, colon, stomach, thyroid, or ovarian and bladder cancer, with birth defects, with disruption of thyroid function because it can compete with iodide for uptake by the thyroid, and also blue baby syndrome because it interferes with the body's ability to carry oxygen. So we can't ignore it. And this is something that kind of really brought this issue home for me. I was in Madison, Wisconsin for the Kernza conference last summer. And the second day was a field day. So we went out and visited farms around that area. We stopped at a research station to see the plots there. And in the bathroom, there was this sign that said, "Notice high levels of nitrate in drinking water. Do not give the water to infants." And that made this very sort of present and relevant for me, having already been working on this for a while. It made it feel more urgent to address this issue. So it's a real thing. If it's detrimental to health, if it's expensive to deal with, why can't we just stop this? Well, we've talked about how this is primarily coming from row crop annuals that are heavily fertilized when they're grown on sensitive land. But these are the crops that dominate the Midwestern landscape. It's important to remember that this is primarily animal feed demand. So so people are generally not eating soybeans and field corn. So in a sense, this is a meat consumption problem. And I like a nice New York strip as much as the next person, but reducing our meat consumption is something we can all do to help lessen our environmental impact. Of course, corporate influence doesn't help. There are a lot of processors and other corporations involved in agriculture that benefit from the way it is. National policy also tends to support this particular system in terms of everything from research investments to the way insurance is structured. And in terms of insurance especially, we can't expect farmers to threaten or risk their own livelihoods on a personal level for problems that we have as a society. Farmers are so often willing to adapt and change and learn and do things differently, but we need to give them adequate support to make sure that they can do that without putting their own livelihood at risk. So these are just some of the factors that make this a difficult issue to deal with. One thing that Minnesota has done is designate wellhead protection areas. So there's about 1.2 million acres throughout the state. It's a designation. It does not confer a protected status on this land, but it at least identifies land that's highly vulnerable to nitrate leaching. About a third of that total area is considered highly vulnerable, which means it has a short transit time to the aquifer. But of that land, about 115,000 acres are still in row crop production. So you can see why, based on what I've told you, this would be really problematic for the drinking water sources that are under that land. We need better options for these areas. So one option, of course, is to return land to natural systems. And, when that's possible, that's great, but that's not always possible. So we want to provide cropping systems so people can still get an income from farming on that land without harming the drinking water. So people have been putting a lot of thought into the nitrate problem. This has gotten attention. And there's kind of three general strategies we could use to address these, as well as other negative environmental impacts of agriculture. One is to just reduce the negative impacts without really changing the system much. So this could be things like improving fertilizer rates and timing, or using nitrification inhibitors. And since I talked a little bit about why nitrate in particular is problematic for leaching as opposed to ammonium or urea, if we can prevent microbes from converting it to nitrate, that can be beneficial. So that's what the nitrification inhibitor piece is. Another approach is sustainable intensification. So we can try and focus production on the most suitable land. So land that's not quite as vulnerable to leaching, areas where the aquifers are maybe a little bit deeper, where the soil isn't so sandy. And then try and leave some of the sensitive land alone. We can also try and increase production on the same amount of land. So this could be things like cover crops, like the forever green winter annuals. And then again, keep leaving that vulnerable land, putting it in CRP or something like that. A third option is to replace ecologically damaging crops or systems with those that provide ecosystem services. So this is where intermediate wheatgrass and some other perennials can fit in, this idea of replacing the whole system on some of the most vulnerable land with something that's not going to cause as much damage. A little bit briefly about the role of perennial crops in general. They tend to have much larger root systems, so they can add organic matter, stabilize the soil. Ideally, they have fewer inputs, less tillage. And this table on the right here shows some of the Minnesota nutrient reduction goals and the strategies that could be used to meet them. And so these are goals set by the state of Minnesota to try and reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that ends up in our water, which, as I mentioned briefly before, has all sorts of negative outcomes. So you'll notice that we can do a lot by optimizing fertilizer application, but that doesn't get us to these targets. We still need cover crops. We need perennial crops. We need conservation. Perennial crops are part of the solution to meet these goals. So I just want to emphasize the importance of those in general. And then for nitrate leaching specifically, why Kernza? What makes us think that Kernza is a good approach to try and deal with this issue? Well, it has a deep, extensive root system. It has a very efficient nitrate uptake, and it's also growing early in the spring before annuals are even planted, and late in the fall after annuals have been harvested. So it covers those two windows where we otherwise see a lot of leaching with certain annual crops. And in this picture on the right here, that's Kernza compared to an annual small grain. So just look at the huge size difference in those roots and how much deeper they go. So that is, I think, a good visual representation of the potential of intermediate wheatgrass to take up nitrate before it reaches the groundwater. So research in 2013 by Coleman et al. Has shown that intermediate wheatgrass can reduce nitrate leaching by up to 86% relative to annual wheat. And this was on some heavier soils in Michigan. So the question was asked, would this work here in Minnesota? And some research by people here at the U of M, as well as Lee DeHaan at the Land Institute, found that, yes, this is effective. So this was by Jake Youngers, Lee DeHaan, David Mulla, Craig Schaefer, and Don Wise. And it took place in plots at 3 different agricultural experiment station sites. So these were sort of moderately heavy soils, Wheatville loam, silty clay loam, and a clay loam in Crookston, Lamberton, and Waseca. And they compared 2 types of systems, so corn and then perennial crops, Kernza and switchgrass. They looked at nitrate concentration in the soil solution, and then they were able to model total nitrate leaching loads to get a sense of the impact of these different systems. They found that there was lower soil solution nitrate under Kernza and switchgrass compared to corn for pretty much all of the year. And you'll notice that Kernza is even lower than switchgrass. And this is perhaps owing to the difference between switchgrass and Kernza, Kernza being a cool season grass that's going to be more active earlier and later in the season, whereas switchgrass is a warm season grass. So this is very promising. They also then were able to model the total nitrate leaching loads, and then looking at both the high fertilizer and the no fertilizer treatments, found that Kernza has dramatically lower total nitrate leached than corn, and even somewhat lower than switchgrass in the high-end fertilizer treatment, which is interesting. So those findings were very encouraging. These results suggested that perhaps we should continue to explore this, and it made us ask the question, would this work on sandy soils? So these were a little bit heavier soils, but what about the Central Sand Plains region, where we have all these really serious issues with nitrate leaching? So now I'm going to get into some of the details of our projects. So Project 1 took place in Staples, Minnesota at the Central Lakes Community College. This was a plot scale trial, and we wanted to, first of all, determine dry land yields on sandy soil, so just get a sense of the productivity of a Kernza system in this location, and then compare nitrate leaching under Kernza to a corn soy rotation. So looking at something that would be very typical in this area, and then how much we might be able to improve that by growing intermediate wheatgrass. So again, this is in Staples, Central Sand Plain region. This is a Verndale sandy loam. And this area gets about 27 inches of precipitation annually. This took place over 3 growing seasons, 2018 to 2020. There are 2 treatments, the Kernza, the wheatgrass treatment, and then a corn soy rotation, as I mentioned. And then we're primarily interested in the yield, the nitrate concentration in the soil solution water, drainage, and then total leaching. Let's talk a little bit more about this. So here's some pictures of those 2 treatments. There's soybeans on the left growing next to the wheatgrass, and then corn on the right in between wheatgrass plots. The wheatgrass was established in August 2017. Soy was planted in May 2018 and June 2020. Corn was planted in May 2019. Here's what the plot layout looks like. So we have 12 plots, 6 reps of each treatment, 2 pairs of lysimeters per plot, and those were 24 inches and 48 inches deep. And then we had 1 soil moisture probe tube per plot. And so lysimeters are really straightforward way to collect soil solution water. It's just a PVC pipe with a porous cap on the bottom and a tight seal on the top. And what you do is you have two tubes in there. You close one of them off tightly and use a pump to put a partial vacuum on the tube. That'll suck some water in at the bottom. And you can let that sit for a couple of days to just let it get pulled in there. You come back, you pump air into it from the short tube, and then it will just push it up the long one. And there you go. You have water. You can take that to the lab and have it analyzed for whatever you're interested in. Our case, it's nitrate, of course, but people use it for all sorts of things. So there's me in, I think this is actually in Pipestone, installing some lysimeters in our field down there. So the intermediate wheatgrass and the corn in this experiment were fertilized. The soy was not. So the wheatgrass got 80 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare in May 2018, and then 100 kilograms in May of the following 2 years. Corn got 140 in May 2019, and then 80 kilograms the next month. So split application. So our first response variable was biomass and grain yields. We collected information for this with quadrat and row harvests. There's a picture of what a quadrat harvest of intermediate wheatgrass looks like, and then that's separated into grain and biomass. For soy and corn, a little bit bigger plants, we did row harvest, separate that into grain and biomass as well. Samples were threshed, dried, and weighed. Here are the results of the Kernza. This is grain yields on the left and biomass yields on the right. So grain yields are in kilograms per hectare. The first year we had 850. It dropped down to about 430 and then 220. This is not inconsistent with the pattern of intermediate wheatgrass yields at the moment. And as I mentioned before, that's one thing they're working on. But this demonstrated that we could get reasonably good productivity on this type of soil. And then biomass yields were pretty consistent over the 3 years, kind of hovering between 4 and 5 megagrams per hectare. For the annual crops, there's a graph on the left here showing kilograms per hectare, but to make that sort of more useful, I converted that to bushels per acre. So for soy in 2018, we had 52.5 bushels per acre. And in 2020, we had 33.4. And the average of Todd and Medina counties, because Staples is like kind of right on the line between the two, for soy is 38 to 42 bushels per acre. And then for corn in 2019, we had 138 bushels per acre. Similarly, the average for Todd and Medina counties is 152 to 173, but a lot of that is irrigated, and this was not. So for both of the annual crops, our yields were reasonable. And then here's the data on the biomass, and this is in megagrams per hectare as well. So soy around 2.4, 2.8, corn around 5.8. So then our next response variable, soil solution nitrate concentration. So again, we measured this with 2 lysimeter pairs per plot. Water was collected every 10 days or so and then analyzed by the Department of Agriculture lab. So here is this data. I'm going to show you this in 3 slides, one for each year. And on all 3 slides, the EPA drinking water limit of 10 parts per million is the red line. So the axes change, but that red line is at the same place. So you can kind of have that as a reference. So keep in mind that this is fertilized Kernza and unfertilized soy. And the leaching under unfertilized soy was higher than Kernza most of the year. Whereas Kernza, once it got established kind of by midsummer after it was planted the fall before, almost nothing. It just stayed consistently very low. Whereas soybean did drop a bit in the fall, things dried out a little bit, but then after harvest, those nitrogen-rich nodules start to break down in the soil and leaching goes right back up. So those were our first year results. Second year, notice again that axis is totally different. So this goes up to 90 now, but that red line is in the same place. And we found that nitrate was much lower under fertilized Kernza than fertilized corn. We saw this really big bump in the middle of the corn season, and just a little bit of a bump in midsummer under Kernza. We think that might have been heavy rain, but clearly big differences here. And then from this growing season, we have soy again and wheatgrass. Again, the Kernza stayed really low throughout the season. Soy was kind of hovering around 10 parts per million or so, a little above, a little below. And this is lower than 2018, and we're not quite sure why, but we think it may be due to kind of drought-like conditions up there. It was very dry, so that might have led to less leaching, but we're still analyzing stuff. So then soil water. So this is the moisture probe we use to measure that. That's the Dynamax TDR probe. And we had one of these soil meter access points per plot. And the reason that we really want this soil moisture data is because it is used to calculate the water that drains off from the field, like the total volume that leaches, basically. So combining this with information on plant water use and precipitation, and then knowing the soil water content at these 6 points throughout the profile, we can get a sense of how much is moving down through the soil. And this is going to be useful for calculating our major response variable of interest, which is the total nitrate leached. So that, as I mentioned before when we were talking about nitrate, that is a function of the nitrate level in the soil solution water and the total volume of drainage water. So that's how this all fits together to help us estimate the total nitrate leaching load. So these analyses are still in progress, but we'll be really excited to see what those are. So a quick summary of project 1. We found much lower levels of nitrate in soil solution water under Kernza compared to a corn soy rotation. We determined yields from Kernza grown on sandy soil. We are continuing our analysis on drainage and total leaching loads. And generally, these results are consistent with earlier work. There's nothing really shocking so far, but it's exciting to see that we were able to get similar results on a different soil type. So now I'm going to tell you about project 2. Time is limited, so this is going to be a lot briefer, but this is an important piece of our research, I think, to discuss as well. So these are 2 field scale plantings located in Pipestone, right in that southwest corner of the state, almost at the South Dakota border. I thought it was exciting to drive over the border to South Dakota, and nobody else thought that was very exciting, but I had never been there before. So, and then our other site is in Chatfield, really beautiful down there in the southeast corner of the state. And these are both looking at determining dryland yields, so not irrigated, on sandy soil for a low input system. So these are not fertilized. And we were measuring nitrate leaching under both of these in basically the same way that we measured it in Staples. So this took place over the same time frame, planted in September 2017, 3 growing seasons, 2018, 2019, 2020. One treatment, the unfertilized wheatgrass. It was quadrat and combine harvested each August. And then we used lysimeters and the soil water content probe, just like we did in Staples, to take those measurements. So here's what the Pipestone field looks like. Really flat out there. We have 2 fields there. And so what we did is we have 4 lysimeter pairs in each field, one 24 inches deep, one 48 inches deep. There we have a soil moisture access tube at each of those points as well. There's an abandoned farmhouse there. I thought that was exciting too. It's an exciting site for me. What can I say? And then in Chatfield, this is our field. This is 13 acres. And then we have similarly have those 4 lysimeter locations, and one in each quadrat. There's a picture just showing kind of what that site looks like. A lot more rolling down there. It's a really fun drive. And they get a little bit more precipitation. It's like 34 inches, and this is a silt loam. And if I didn't say before, we have 54 acres total in Pipestone and 13 down here in Chatfield, both on sensitive areas. So, okay, this red line is the same as the other graphs. It's at 10 parts per million. And look at how low those nitrate concentrations are. They are below 1 part per million, basically just the entire growing season. I don't think we had a single individual sample that was higher than 1. It was just consistently extremely low. So they're not fertilized, of course, but this was good to know, to just get a sense of what that production system would look like, and that it's very low in leaching. And one of our next steps that we'd like to do is to do some fertilized field scale trials and see what that looks like. And I have a feeling we might get good results from that too. So here are the yields from Chatfield and Pipestone. And so I actually just have the 2019 and 2020 yields, because in 2018 things were harvested in a different way, and so I can't quite make a direct comparison. So this is just the last 2 years. But in Chatfield we had 313 and then 213 kilograms per hectare. In Pipestone we had about 400 and then 129. And again, this is not particularly inconsistent with some of our other sites, as we're still developing this crop and working on yield persistence. And then biomass yields, we had a lot in Chatfield in 2019, almost 10,000 kilograms per hectare, down to about 5,700 in 2020. And then in Pipestone, we had just under 5,000 the first year, and then a bit over 4,000 this year. So a quick summary of Project 2. Very low nitrate levels in both sites throughout the year. We determined yields for a low input system on sensitive land, and it's valuable to have that data to have a sense of what we could expect. And we collected soil moisture data that will be used in modeling, so that's useful as well. This synthesis of plot and field scale trials is really important, because it validates plot scale results on a practical scale. It provides opportunities to refine harvesting techniques and develop the supply chain. And another objective of this research, beyond just my project, is to foster cross-stakeholder engagement. And it was really cool to go to some of the meetings with the guys on the Lincoln Pipestone Rural Water Board. And there were farmers who were helping on that field scale project. And everybody was sitting around brainstorming together what the best way was going to be to get the Kernza off the field, because it's a new crop. There's not a super clear protocol for how to harvest. And, you know, that is so valuable in research, is to have input from people in the community that it could affect, to have people say, here's what can make this work for me, for my neighbors. So that was very meaningful to me, to get to be a part of things like that. We had similar meetings with people in Chatfield, and people were really excited about it. Having those field scale trials gave them an opportunity to participate in a way that is harder to do with plot scale trials. So that's also a really cool part of this work. The impacts of this work. This is already translated to some actual landscape change. So because there have been these really promising results from studies on intermediate wheatgrass and nitrate leaching, the state of Minnesota has initialized programs to incentivize Kernza production on wellhead protection areas. So the state is convinced that this strategy is worth investing in to protect our drinking water resources. Another impact is this provides data and informs strategies for meeting those nutrient reduction goals that I mentioned earlier. So our partners at the Department of Agriculture are really interested in the data we've collected on soil moisture and nitrate concentrations, because they want to get a sense of, well, if we have this kind of landscape change, what can we expect in terms of changes in drinking water? So they want to do some modeling work too, and this is a useful collaboration. This has also been a catalyst for further research, so trying yet other soil types and climate regimes and systems. So for example, we have new plots at the Rochalt Research Farm in Westport, Minnesota. We're looking there at Kernza, alfalfa, and prairie with and without irrigation. We have lysimeters there too, and soil moisture access tubes. And a big takeaway from that study is that the soil probe truck does not go through fist-sized rocks. So we learned that very definitively that day. It was a rough couple days trying to get those in, but we did. So we should have some cool results from this study in a couple years. We have a new on-farm trial too in Cold Spring. Absolutely gorgeous. This is like some of the most stunning sky I've ever seen. We have lysimeters there as well to measure soil solution nitrate in also very rocky soil. Another challenging field day, but we did it. So in conclusion, we collected throughout the course of this project useful data on yields and nitrate leaching on vulnerable land for both fertilized and unfertilized dryland Kernza production. Our results have shown that Kernza production is associated with very low levels of nitrate leaching in a range of conditions. And it supports previous research that Kernza production can be a good option for farming on wellhead protection areas. So that really ties back to our original research question of how can we grow things in ways that are economically and environmentally sustainable. With that, I want to say a huge thank you to our partners. We really cannot do this kind of work alone. We need feedback from stakeholders all over the state with different experiences, different perspectives. So it's been useful, but also a pleasure to work with all these people. And I'd like to acknowledge that our funding comes from LCCMR. And then I would also like to say a huge thank you to all the people who have worked on this project. Forgive me if I've missed anybody, but we have a ton of people in our lab who've been out there harvesting, threshing, doing tons of work to make all of these things happen. I really appreciate the advice and support of my advisory committee. Also the feedback I got from Don Wise and the APS seminar class, our partners at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Hannah Barrett and Ryan Parrish did some of that field work with us in Staples, people we worked with in Chatfield and Olmsted County, our partners in Lincoln Pipestone as well. So many people collaborated to make this happen, and a big thank you to all of them. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Great job, Evelyn. So if you have any question, now is the time to type it in the Q&A box. Before some questions from our attendees, I was wondering if you have an idea if you have an idea of what is the maximum rooting depth of the Kernza.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm sure there's data out there. I don't know that offhand, but I'm trying to remember what I've heard. No doubt somebody in the audience knows this off the top of their head, but I think easily 6, 7, 8, 10 feet. Okay. But yeah, I don't know if somebody knows this for sure, like maybe they can type that in the chat and Reneth can read it off. I don't want to just make up numbers, but I guess I did. So. Let's see, oh, I think I can. Oh, okay, awesome. Trevor Russell says 16 feet root depth.
Okay, max, thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Trevor.
So are there any questions from anyone? Okay, so there's a question. There's a question from Sylvia. So she's asking if currently what is the biggest hurdle towards widespread adoption of Kernza, and what has the general farmer reception been so far?
That's an excellent question. I think some of the biggest hurdles are relate to the goals of the Kernza program that I mentioned, just sort of addressing all those pieces to get this to a point where it's an attractive, reliable and profitable system for farmers. But I think generally the sense I've gotten from talking with farmers and talking with other stakeholders in communities around the state is people are super excited. There's a lot of farmers willing to give this a shot. I mean, there's more requests to grow Kernza than there is Kernza seed at the moment. So I would say generally very positive reception. And I mean, people, it's their communities where drinking water is contaminated. And so, you know, they're jumping at the opportunity to be a part of something that could help address that.
Great. And we have another question. So since the yield decreases over the years, do you have to terminate the Kernza after 3 years? And if you do you replant Kernza or would you rotate it with something?
That's a great question. That's one way I think that's kind of been presented now, is to have a 3-year stand, terminate it, and then it could be part of an extended rotation. So you could even do like a soy, small grain corn, and then Kernza, something like that. I think I saw an example of recently. But at the moment, that's kind of the idea. Oh, I see a question here in the chat. How does Kernza taste? It's quite good. It's definitely, like, I would say, a bolder flavor than like wheat or barley, but it has like a little bit of a, I don't know, kind of a nutty flavor. And if you get a chance to try it, I definitely recommend it. It's fun to try something new. And there's pasta, there's bread, there's beer, there's all sorts of things that are made with it now.
Great. We have another question. So is there a state incentive payment for planting Kernza on vulnerable soils?
Ooh, I don't want to get this wrong. I don't know what the structure of the incentivization is. So if somebody else knows the details on exactly how that works, feel free to like type that in the chat.
Okay. FN is also asking question. So what is a must-try Kernza-related product available to consumers if any are available?
Oh, I think I've gotten the impression that the supply is kind of like variable. So I don't know what's easily and like consistently accessible, except I believe the Birchwood Cafe makes stuff with it regularly. So you might be able to find stuff there. Oh, and okay, Trevor said in the chat here, beer. So maybe that's a little bit more consistent. I think there's like a long root ale is that from Patagonia Provisions as well? And
the Bang Brewery just south of the St. Paul campus.
Okay, perfect. So there's some local options for this. Oh, okay. And then Trevor's asking in the chat. Okay, and Trevor says driftless brewing. And then he also asked, after the Kernza grain is harvested, is there a fall grazing opportunity? Yes, there is. And we've done some studies on that. And I think Mitch Hunter would be a good person to ask for more details about that. But yes, definitely there's opportunities for grazing and working that into the system. I think
Michael is asking, I don't know. Great job, Evelyn. From my understanding, soil microbes play a role in nitrate immobilization. Does Kernza benefit these microbes or affect them in any way?
That I don't know. Let's see, I know Jess Goodconnect is on here. She's a soil microbial ecologist. She would probably be an excellent person to ask about that. And then Sylvia Reilly asked, as consumers, is there a way we can support Kernza growth through what we purchase? I say yes, look for these products. I think that shows these companies that there really is an interest. So the couple things that people mentioned, and there's a bakery in Minneapolis too that had been making bread with Kernza, and I don't know if they still are, but yeah, just buy food made with Kernza. Okay, awesome. And then you can buy Kernza flour from Perennial Pantry. So thank you guys for noting these resources. So that link is in there if anybody's curious.
Yeah, and there's one more question. So how much does the lack of fertilizer affect the yield of Kernza? And for the work you have done, is the decrease in yield due to lack of fertilizer or the soil type?
Oh, that's a good question. And I kind of feel like I shouldn't speculate because we haven't done like an analysis on that yet. So yeah, so I'm hesitant to answer that just based on the data we have. I would think like for any crop though, that you would see, you know, more of a decline without fertilizer. From what I understand, we do know that in order to maintain a profitable Kernza system, there does have to be some kind of nitrogen input, like, you know, anything, any kind of cropping system. So yeah, sorry, that's a little vague, but.
So are there any questions for Evelyn?
Okay, and Aaron, research says in
there's
the
still one.
chat, where would you be most excited to see this research go next? I would love to see field scale trials fertilized, because I think it would be great to validate that plot scale research that we did and see, can we, what do the yields look like and what does nitrate leaching look like if we do this over 3 years in like Pipestone or Chatfield. And that's actually something we've been talked about trying to do this year in Chatfield, but yeah, obviously it's a bit of a difficult year, but I hope that that's something we can do in the next couple of years.
Anyone else has a question?
All right, well, thank you so much to everyone. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and hear a little bit about this research. And I don't know if my email is available, but feel free. There's a lot of people at the university who know a ton about this. So if you're curious, look up Forever Green. You can just Google Kernza, University of Minnesota, and all sorts of resources will come up. So lots of ways to learn more if you have questions.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Evelyn, for that great presentation.